Do you know how every Demon Slayer character would react if Tanjiro got killed? Yeah, the whole world would literally shake from the shock of that insane news, and the Hashira, they would absolutely lose it. But first, Nezuko, she'd take the news the worst. Yeah, she'd hear that Tanjiro went out on some random casual mission when he got jumped by Muzan and the Upper Moons, who killed him, while she was back at the Butterfly Mansion and literally taking a nap. And yeah, it would completely break her. So she'd snap and instantly turn into her full raging demon form, tear through the mansion walls, and run straight into the forest to hunt down every single demon to avenge her brother. Because the only thing that kept Nezuko from becoming a full-on human-eating demon who devour humans for their blood was her brother. Like, remember when Sanemi stabbed her, waved his bloody arm in her face, and she was drooling? Yeah, she was trying so hard to keep herself from literally just taking his entire arm. And the only reason she was holding herself back was because she remembered how much she loved her human brother, and the promise that every human needs to be protected and saved. Which is why she turned away from Sanemi in disgust. Well, also because she obviously doesn't like the guy. Anyway, without Tanjiro around, she'd completely lose her humanity, her demon instinct would take over, and she'd literally be roaming the forest forever as an uncontrollable demon who just went around killing both demons and humans. Well, until Muzan finally finds her and just snatches her and brings her to the Infinity Castle to do experiments on her. So basically, Nezuko would lose it, but someone else who'd also be absolutely raging is Inosuke. Yeah, when he hears the news that Tanjiro is dead from the Kikuchi, he's obviously gonna want to fight him, because there's no way Inosuke would believe it at first. But when he realizes Tanjiro is actually dead, he's gonna be crying his eyes out under that boar mask, doing his iconic messy cry. Because Tanjiro wasn't just his rival, he was basically his literal brother. Like, even though Inosuke couldn't even get his name right once, these two were best friends and always had each other's backs. So just like Nezuko, Inosuke would go out on his own mission to kill the demon who killed his brother. And this guy would be running around screaming that he will show Tanjiro that he's stronger than him by taking down the monster who killed him. So he wouldn't just be angry and sad, he would also be super determined to become the strongest in the entire world, to show everyone that you can't mess with his friends. But what about Zenitsu? This guy would lose his mind. He would start crying and be literally unconsolable. He saw Tanjiro as his best friend and basically his rock. And the second he realizes that Tanjiro, the strongest and kindest guy he knows, got killed, Zenitsu would be like, "Nope, I quit, I'm done." And he'd immediately leave the Demon Slayer Corps. Yeah, I know, you probably thought he'd turn into that badass, cold, and terrifyingly calm Thunder God mode where he can blitz anyone with his thunder breathing, right? Nope! This time, he's way too scared to die himself. Because if even Tanjiro couldn't survive, Zenitsu's convinced he'd not have a chance of surviving. So yep, he would just leave the Demon Slayer Corps and go right back to being a full-time crybaby and a menace to every single woman in Japan. Yeah, he'd be running around and harassing and begging random women to marry him, screaming that he's gonna die any day now from the scary demons and needs a wife ASAP. So yeah, Zenitsu would go back to crying, panicking, and aggressively proposing to every woman who walks past him. But that's not what Giyu Tomioka would do. At first, he wouldn't even believe it. He always saw Tanjiro as the one who would one day take his place as the Water Hashira. He just respected him so much for his strength, determination, and kindness. Not only that though, but Giyu literally saw Tanjiro as his one and only real friend in the whole world. So when he hears the news, sure, he would look all unbothered and stoic on the outside like always, but he would be broken inside. Because Giyu's already lost Sabato, his sister, and so many other comrades. So losing Tanjiro would just break him. He would blame himself for not being there to protect him, and he would feel super guilty for being alive while Tanjiro isn't. So he'd feel like a failure and he'd straight up leave the Demon Slayer Corps behind. Why? Because he doesn't want to be close to anyone anymore, as whenever he gets close to people and he cares about them, they all just die. But don't worry, he wouldn't stop being a demon slayer because this guy would actually go off on a solo mission to try to take down every single demon in the world, even if it costs him his life. Another Hashira that would be broken is Mitsuri. Yeah, she saw Tanjiro as one of the purest and kindest people she's ever met. And as she's now lost both Rengoku and Tanjiro, two people who were super close to her, she would just be devastated. So what would she do? she'd turn to the one person who's always been by her side, Obanai, and try to be comforted by him. Because if you didn't know, Mitsuri is super in love with him. So as people she's really close with are dying left and right, she'd feel like she doesn't have time to keep hiding her feelings anymore. So she would just confess her feelings to Obanai, tell him that she's in love with him and that she wants to be his wife. And Obanai, he'd obviously say yes. He's also super in love with her. So even though Mitsuri would be heartbroken from Tanjiro's death, Obanai would patch her heart up and be by her side through her grief. So Obanai, he would be super happy that Tanjiro is dead. Yup, he'd probably throw a literal party, because not only did he finally get the girl he always wanted, but he also got rid of his #1 rival. Yeah, Obanai hated Tanjiro as he thought he was way too friendly, talked too much, and worst of all, he was way too close to Mitsuri. So every time he saw her smiling and laughing around him, Obanai was just raging with jealousy. So yeah, he'd be super happy that he's finally gone and that he can now have Mitsuri all to himself. And another Hashira who honestly wouldn't even care that Tanjiro is dead is Sanemi. Yeah, Sanemi does not like him at all. Like he thought Tanjiro was just a weak idiot, and he still thinks he should have killed Nezuko back at the Hashira meeting when he had the chance, especially now that she's out killing humans. Because don't forget that Sanemi had to kill his own mother, who had turned into a demon, as she almost ended the entire family. So Sanemi will never forget Tanjiro for protecting a demon, even if it was his sister. He also straight up told him before he died that he hasn't accepted him as a demon slayer. And oh, don't forget that these two were even forbidden from talking to each other after they had their fight. So Sanemi wouldn't care that Tanjiro is dead. He would honestly even think he deserves it after protecting a demon who's now slaughtering innocent people. But Muichiro, he'd be depressed, as he basically saw Tanjiro as his brother. Yeah, he reminded him of his actual brother, the one he lost before even becoming a demon slayer. Not only that, but Tanjiro was the one who brought him back to being himself, as he helped him get his memories and emotions back. So, with Tanjiro dead, Muichiro would go straight back to being isolated, staring up into the clouds all day and just continuing to be a demon slayer with zero emotions like before. Because losing Tanjiro would feel like losing his brother all over again. So he'd once again become this cold, distant guy who feels like everyone he loves dies. Next up, Tengen Uzui, and he'd also be devastated. Sure, he obviously never thought Tanjiro was anywhere near as flashy as himself. I mean, he's literally the god of festivals. But Tengen still had so much love and respect for him. Like after fighting side by side against Gyutaro and seeing Tanjiro's insane determination and how far he was willing to push himself just to bring Gyutaro down, Tengen was convinced Tanjiro was strong enough to take his place as a Hashira. But now that he's gone, Tengen's heartbroken and he'd want revenge. So he's gonna have to sit down with his wives and have a really tough talk. But they would accept his decision to rejoin the Demon Slayer Corps as a Hashira because even though he's only got one arm, he's insanely powerful. The last Hashira we gotta talk about is of course Gyomei, and well, he'd cry. Yup, he'd just start mumbling those Buddhist prayer words that he always says, and he'd cry that another kind soul got erased by the evil demons. But it's not just the Hashira that would be devastated, well, except for Obanai and Sanemi of course, it's also Kanao. Yeah, she'd be shattered. Because before she met Tanjiro, she was this super quiet and distant girl who barely showed any emotions. But after he basically unlocked her heart and told her to follow it, she became much more open and finally had a will of her own. So when she hears that Tanjiro has died, she will just cry her eyes out, as he just meant so much to her. I mean, she even had a crush on him. But yeah, with Tanjiro gone, Kanao would never talk again. Nope. She'd be so crushed by his death that she'd once again just become this quiet, distant girl who'd be convinced she's too weak to protect anyone she cares about. Sure, she'd still be a demon slayer, but she would literally never speak a word again. Then Genya, he would also be crying. Yeah, Genya's entire tough guy facade would shatter the moment he hears about Tanjiro's death. Because even though these two had, well, a rocky start, as this guy seriously almost broke his arm, they later became really close, with Genya literally seeing him as his only real friend. So with Tanjiro dead, Genya would feel lonelier than ever, and because of that, it would push Genya to do something huge, to try and fix things with his brother, Sanemi. Because if you didn't know, after Genya and Sanemi's mother was turned into a demon, killed almost their entire family, and Sanemi having no other choice but to kill her, their bond shattered and they went their different ways. But Genya never stopped loving his brother, so now all he wants is to make amends with him, even though Sanemi makes it really hard. But here's where things get crazy. Because when Genya goes up to Sanemi and demands that they make peace and become brothers again, and says that he became a demon slayer to have Sanemi see him, acknowledge him, and be proud of the man he's become, Sanemi would literally make Genya blind. Wait, what? But why? Because Sanemi never wanted Genya to be a demon slayer in the first place, as he already lost his entire family, so he refuses to lose Genya too. So in the most extreme, messed up, but still twistedly loving way, he'd blind Genya to force him to quit the demon slayer life and live peacefully for the rest of his life. Yeah, I know that's crazy, but Sanemi's plan will actually work, so that's what will happen to Genya if Tanjiro dies. Moving on to Urokodaki, and when he hears the news, he's just gonna be quietly standing outside his home, the same place he trained Tanjiro, and remember every single moment they shared. Because to him, Tanjiro was basically like his own son. I mean, he loved him so much, trusted him completely, and believed in him more than anyone. But instead of trying to get revenge, since he's retired, he'd just give Tanjiro a beautiful gravesite, showing how much he really meant to him. And guess who would be at his grave like every day? Giyu. Yup, he'd just stand there quietly for hours. Then we also have to talk about Haganezuka. Because even though he and Tanjiro, well, weren't exactly best friends, like we've seen Haganezuka go full rage mode and chase after him with knives after he keeps breaking his precious swords. Still, he respected him as someone worthy of wielding his swords, so when he hears that he's dead, he would actually blame himself. Why? Because he knows how good of a swordsman Tanjiro actually is, so he would say that it has to be that the sword he forged wasn't good enough. So he'd go straight back to work, and he'd work until he could create the perfect Nichiren blade that can take down all demons. But alright, we've talked about all humans, so now it's time we talk about some of the demons. And when Muzan finally makes sure Tanjiro is dead, he's throwing a full-on party in the Infinity Castle, celebrating with all the demons and just laughing for a whole day straight. Yeah, Muzan just hated Tanjiro that much, and most of his hatred was actually because of his earrings. Why? Well, from the very first time Muzan saw Tanjiro in Asakusa with those Hanafuda earrings, he absolutely lost it. They reminded him of his biggest nightmare, Yoriichi Tsugikuni, the sun-breathing legend who almost killed him centuries ago. So the second Muzan realized Tanjiro was connected to sun-breathing, he went full panic mode. And since that moment, Muzan has done everything to try and kill him. Like, remember when Akaza showed up at the Mugen train and instantly went to kill him? Yep, that was because Muzan had told him that if he sees anyone with Hanafuda earrings, that person must die. So that's why when Muzan finally saw an opportunity to take out Tanjiro when he was all alone, he gathered the upper moons, cornered him, and finally took him out. So now that he's gone, Muzan feels like he basically took out Yoriichi. And guess what? That made Muzan the happiest guy in the world. Yeah, he's just the happiest guy ever. And I mean, he's even kind to the demons now. He's just that happy. But what about Akaza? Well, he honestly wouldn't even care all that much. I mean, Akaza actually respects Tanjiro a lot for how strong he is, as Akaza respects all people who are strong. So now that Tanjiro's ridiculously powerful, he's got so much respect for him. Although, yeah, he still absolutely hates him, as he still reminds him of his tragic past. So that Tanjiro is dead actually makes Akaza pretty happy, although he really just doesn't care all that much. So yeah, basically all the humans except Sanemi and Obanai, of course, are going to be devastated. And the demons, they will be celebrating. How would you react if Tanjiro were killed? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and watch this video next.